The axiom had never been wrong. For 11,000 years, this massive machine had predicted everything. Wars, peace treaties, natural disasters, the rise and fall of entire civilizations. It was built across 3 moons and powered by a dying star. Every species in the Galactic Concordance trusted it completely. Its predictions were treated as absolute truth. No one questioned the axiom. No one needed to. Until today. Admiral Kyung-Soo Park walked through the long white halls of the Concordance Council building. His boots clicked against the polished floor. Beside him walked Captain Hana Lee, his most trusted officer. She was younger than him by 15 years, but her eyes held the same hard determination that had kept humanity alive in the cold reaches of space. They had been called here without explanation. That alone was strange. The Concordance always explained everything. They were obsessed with information, with data, with certainty. For them to summon humans without reason meant something had gone very wrong. The doors to the council chamber opened. Inside, dozens of alien species sat in a massive circular room. Some had crystalline bodies that caught the light. Others were made of living shadow. Others were made of living shadow. A few floated in anti-gravity fields, their forms too strange to describe. All of them looked at the 2 humans with expressions that ranged from curiosity to fear. At the center of the room stood High Arbiter Thyssen. His body was made of living crystal, blue and purple light pulsing beneath his transparent skin. He had led the Concordance for 300 years. In all that time, Kyung-Soo had never seen him look afraid. He looked afraid now. Admiral Park, Captain Lee, thank you for coming so quickly. Thyssen's voice echoed through the chamber like wind chimes in a storm. You didn't give us much choice, Kyung-Soo replied. Your message said it was urgent. Something about the axiom? A ripple of unease passed through the assembled aliens. Several of them looked away. Others made sounds that might have been prayers in their native languages. Thyssen raised one crystalline hand. A holographic display appeared in the air above them. It showed the axiom itself, an impossible machine wrapped around 3 moons, glowing with the light of captured stars. But something was wrong with the image. Parts of it were flickering. Error codes scrolled across the display in languages Kyung-Soo didn't recognize. The axiom has stopped, Thyssen said simply. Hana stepped forward. Stopped? Machines don't just stop. What happened to it? Nothing happened to it. The axiom is functioning perfectly. Its power systems are stable. Its processing cores are operating at full capacity. Thyssen paused, and that pause stretched into something painful. It has simply refused to continue making predictions about Sector 7 Gamma. Refused? Kyung-Soo frowned. You're telling me a machine refused to do something? Yes. The Zan's crystalline form flickered with colors that suggested deep distress. When we attempt to input any predictive model involving your species, the system returns a single message. He gestured, and new text appeared on the display. Human variable unacceptable. Probability matrices corrupted. Continuation impossible. The chamber fell silent. Kyung-Soo read the words 3 times, trying to understand what they meant. Beside him, Hana let out a short laugh that held no humor. Your prediction engine broke because of us? She asked. Not broke, Thyssen corrected. Refused. There's a difference. The axiom can still predict everything else. The movement of stars, the outcomes of elections on worlds you have never heard of, the weather patterns on gas giants at the edge of the galaxy. All of this continues normally. But the moment we introduce human variables into any calculation, the system crashes. One of the other council members spoke up. This one was a tall being made of living shadow, its voice like whispers in an empty room. We have tried everything. We have simplified the models. We have isolated individual humans and attempted to predict their behavior. We have even tried to predict events where humans are merely observers rather than participants. Nothing works. Your species breaks the axiom. Kyung-soo exchanged a glance with Hana. He could see she was thinking the same thing he was. This was either very good news or very bad news, and they didn't have enough information to know which. "Why does this matter right now?" he asked. "I understand this is strange, but surely it can wait until your scientists figure out the problem." Thiesen's form flickered again, darker this time. "It cannot wait, Admiral. The Kreth Dominion has begun its invasion of Sector 7 Gamma. They are burning colonies. Millions are dying. And we cannot predict the outcome because your fleet is deployed there." Ah, now it made sense. The Kreth were one of the most aggressive species in the galaxy. They expanded through conquest, consuming worlds and enslaving populations. The Concordance had kept them in check for centuries through careful diplomacy backed by the Axiom's predictions. They always knew what the Kreth would do before the Kreth knew it themselves. But now the Axiom was blind, and humanity was standing in the way. "So remove us from the equation," Hana said. Her voice was cold. "Pull our fleet back. Let your predictions work again. Then you can defeat the Kreth like you always have." Several council members nodded eagerly, but Thiesen shook his crystalline head. "We have modeled that scenario. If we remove human forces from Sector 7 Gamma, the Kreth will conquer 17 inhabited worlds within 6 months. 4 billion sentient beings will die or be enslaved. The cascade effects will destabilize half the Concordance." He paused. "We need you there. But we cannot predict what will happen if you stay." Kyung-soo smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent his entire career fighting against impossible odds, who had watched humanity claw its way from a single blue planet to the stars, who had buried friends on a dozen worlds and kept moving forward. "Then don't predict," he said. "Let us do what we do best." Thiesen tilted his head. "And what is that, Admiral?" "Improvise." The word hung in the air. Several aliens made sounds of confusion or distress. The concept seemed foreign to them, almost obscene. For 11,000 years, they had lived by prediction. The idea of acting without knowing the outcome was terrifying. But Kyung-soo saw something else in Thiesen's crystalline eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. "Very well," the High Arbiter said slowly. "The Concordance will provide you with ships, supplies, and full authority to act as you see fit in Sector 7 Gamma. But Admiral, I must ask you something." "Yes? Are you not afraid?" "To act without knowing what will happen." Kyung-soo thought about the question. He thought about Earth, that small blue marble floating in an ocean of darkness. He thought about all the times humanity should have died, but didn't. All the predictions that said they would fail but proved wrong. "High Arbiter," he said, "we've never known what would happen. That's what makes us human." Hana nodded beside him, and together they turned to leave. Behind them, the council chamber erupted in confused whispers. The Axiom remained dark and silent, unable to calculate what was coming. And somewhere in Sector 7 Gamma, the Kreth Dominion burned worlds, confident in their predicted victory. They had no idea what was coming for them. Chief Engineer Ji-ho Kim had spent his entire adult life working with machines. He understood them in ways that most people could not. To him, every system had logic, every problem had a solution, and every error had a cause. He had fixed broken starship engines during battle. He had rebuilt communication arrays while floating in the vacuum of space. He had once kept a failing life support system, running for 3 days using nothing but spare parts and stubbornness. But he had never seen anything like the Axiom, the Machines stretched before him like a metal ocean. Towers of processing cores rose into the darkness above. Rivers of light flowed through transparent tubes, carrying energy from the captured star at the system's heart. The scale of it made Jiho feel very small. This machine had been running since before humans discovered fire. It had watched his species crawl out of caves and reach for the star's dot, and now it refused to look at them. "Show me again," Jiho said. He stood at a control station deep within the Axiom's primary core. Beside him floated Vorath, the machine's keeper. Vorath had maintained the Axiom for 600 years. His body was made of tentacles and eyes, dozens of them, all moving independently, yet somehow working together. "I have shown you 17 times, Vorath replied. His voice was tired. "The result is always the same. Show me again." Vorath made a sound that might have been a sigh. His tentacles danced across the holographic controls. The recording began to play once more. G-Ho watched carefully. The display showed a standard military simulation. Kreth warships advancing on a concordance colony. The Axiom calculated their speed, their weapons, their tactics. Everything was precise. Everything was predictable. Then the simulation introduced the human fleet. The entire display shattered into fragments. "You see?" Vorath said. "The moment your species enters the calculation, all probability matrices collapse. It is not that the Axiom cannot process you. It is that every attempt produces contradictory results." Jiho leaned forward, studying the fragments of the failed prediction. "What do you mean by contradictory?" Vorath's many eyes blinked in sequence. "I mean exactly what I say. When we model human behavior, the Axiom returns multiple outcomes simultaneously. You retreat and you advance. You surrender and you fight. You die and you survive. Every possibility exists at once. The machine cannot resolve the contradiction." "That's not possible," Jiho said. "We're just people. We make choices like anyone else. Do you?" Vorath moved closer, and Jiho could feel the ancient intelligence behind those countless eyes. "I have studied your species since you first appeared in our records. You are not like anyone else. Every other species follows patterns. Given the same situation, they will make the same choice 97% of the time. But humans..." He paused. "Humans will make different choices for reasons the Axiom cannot understand." Jiho thought about this. He thought about his grandmother, who had once walked 40 miles through a snowstorm to bring medicine to a stranger. He thought about the soldiers who had volunteered for suicide missions during the colony wars. He thought about the artists who created beauty in the middle of battlefields. And the scientists who kept working on cures while cities burned around them. "We're not irrational," he said slowly. "We just value different things than you expect. That is precisely the problem." Vorath brought up a new display. "Look at this. This is a record of your species' history, analyzed by the Axiom." The display filled with text and images. Jiho saw war after war, disaster after disaster, plagues that killed millions, environmental collapse, nuclear weapons, 1,000 ways humanity should have destroyed itself. "By every model we have, your species should have gone extinct 17 times, Vorath said. "You came close, very close. But each time you survived. Not because the odds favored you, not because you made logical choices, but because some of you chose to do things that made no sense." "Like what?" "Like protecting strangers at the cost of your own lives. Like refusing to abandon the weak when leaving them behind would have saved the many. Like continuing to hope when hope was mathematically impossible." Vorath's tentacles curled inward, a gesture Jiho recognized as confusion. These behaviors should not exist. Natural selection should have eliminated them. But you kept them. You cherished them. You call them virtues. Jiho started to laugh. He couldn't help it. The sound echoed through the ancient chamber, bouncing off metal walls that had never heard human laughter before. "You're telling me," he said between laughs, "that your prediction engine broke because humans are too nice?" "Not nice," Vorath corrected. "Unpredictable. Kindness is predictable when it serves self-interest. But your species shows kindness when it serves nothing at all. That is what breaks our models." Jiho wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. His mind was racing now, seeing patterns that Vorath could not see. "Can I send a message to the fleet? I need to talk to Admiral Park." "Why?" "Because I think I understand something important." Jiho turned back to the failed prediction on the display. "You see this as a malfunction, a bug in the system. But it's not. It's information." Vorath tilted his body in confusion. "Explain." "The axiom can't predict us because we don't follow patterns." "But the Kreth? They follow patterns, right?" "Their military uses the axiom's predictions to plan their attacks?" "Of course. All species in the Concordance do." Jiho grinned. It was the same grin his grandmother had worn when she walked through that snowstorm. The grin of someone who sees a path where others see only obstacles. "Then, the Kreth have never fought an enemy they couldn't predict," he said. "Their entire military doctrine is based on knowing what the other side will do. They've never faced uncertainty. They've never known fear." Vorath was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly understanding began to dawn in his many eyes. Meanwhile, on the other side of the sector, Dr. Yuna Choi was learning the same truth from a different source. She sat in a small room aboard the flagship, Defiant Hope. Across from her sat a Kreth prisoner, captured during a recent skirmish. The Kreth were tall and thin, with skin like polished bone and eyes that reflected no light. This one called himself Karveth. He was a junior officer who had been left behind when his ship retreated. "You do not behave correctly," Karveth said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "We calculated your response patterns. You should have killed me or traded me for prisoners. Instead, you give me food and ask me questions. We're curious about you," Yuna replied. "Your species, your culture, your beliefs. Isn't that a good enough reason?" "No. Curiosity is inefficient. It does not serve tactical objectives." Yuna leaned forward. "What do your tactical objectives tell you about us?" Karveth was silent. His bone-white face showed no expression, but something flickered in his dead eyes. Something that might have been confusion. Or fear. "Your fleet should have retreated after the Battle of Nexus Point," he said finally. "You lost 4 ships. Your chances of victory decreased by 37%. Retreat was the logical choice, but we didn't retreat. No, you advanced. You attacked a supply depot we thought was secure. You destroyed ships we could not replace." His voice dropped lower. "You acted against your own interests. We could not predict this." Yuna smiled softly. "We call it courage. Or maybe stubbornness. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." "It is madness," Karveth said. "Your actions make no sense. They make sense to us." The Kreth stared at her for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, almost afraid. "My commanders are worried. The axiom has gone dark. Our own prediction systems return only errors when they model your fleet. For the first time in our history, we do not know what will happen next." He paused. "This is a very uncomfortable feeling." Yuna thought about all the times humanity had faced the unknown. All the dark nights when they had no idea if the dawn would come. All the moments of terror and hope and desperate action. "It is uncomfortable," she agreed. "But it can also be beautiful. Not knowing what will happen means anything is possible." Karveth did not respond. But Yuna saw something change in his eyes, a crack in his certainty, a seed of doubt that would grow into something larger. She sent her report to Admiral Park. Combined with Jiho's findings, a picture was beginning to form. Humanity was not just unpredictable. They were a weapon, and they were about to teach the galaxy what fear really meant. Commander Taehyun Yoon stood on the bridge of his ship, the Starfall, and counted the enemy vessels on his display. 200 Kreth warships formed a perfect formation in the darkness ahead. Their weapons were charged. Their shields were at full power. They moved with the precise coordination of a species that had never known doubt. Taehyun had 17 ships. The math was simple. The math said he should run. The math said he should save his crews and retreat to fight another day. Every tactical manual ever written agreed on this point. When you are outnumbered 12-1, you do not engage. Taehyun smiled and leaned back in his command chair. Lieutenant Kang, he said calmly, signal all ships. We're going to execute pattern Omega-7. Lieutenant Subin Kang looked up from her tactical display. She was young, barely 25, but she had already served in 3 major engagements. She had learned to trust her commander, but this order made her hesitate. Sir, pattern Omega-7 is a training exercise. We made it up during academy exercises to confuse the instructors. It's not a real battle formation. I know. It provides no tactical advantage. Our ships will be spread across 3 different vectors with no mutual fire support. Half our weapons will be pointed at empty space. I know. Subin stared at him. Taehyun could see her trying to find the logic in his order. She would not find it. That was the point. Sir, with all respect, why? Taehyun stood up and walked to the main view screen. The Kreth fleet hung in the void like a perfect constellation. Every ship exactly where it should be. Every weapon aimed at the optimal target. They were beautiful in their precision. Look at them, he said. They know exactly what we should do. Their prediction systems have calculated our most likely responses. If we attack in a standard formation, they have a counter ready. If we retreat, they will pursue at the exact speed needed to catch us. If we try to flank them, they will already be in position to block us. So we're already defeated. No. Taehyun turned to face his crew. They were looking at him with a mixture of fear and trust. He loved them for that trust. He would try to be worthy of it. We're only defeated if we do what they expect. But what if we do something they cannot predict? Something that makes no sense? Subin's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. They can't counter what they can't predict. Exactly. The Kreth have fought 1,000 wars. They've never lost because they always knew what the enemy would do. But today they're fighting humans. And humans are crazy. He returned to his command chair. The bridge was silent, except for the hum of the engines and the soft beeping of instruments. All hands, Taehyun said, his voice carrying through every speaker on every ship. This is Commander Yoon. In a few minutes, we will engage a force that outnumbers us 12-1. By any reasonable calculation, we should not be here. We should run. We should hide. We should survive to fight another day. He paused, letting his words sink in. But we are not reasonable. We are human. Our ancestors crossed oceans in wooden boats. They climbed mountains that should have killed them. They flew into space on rockets that were barely more than controlled explosions. They did these things not because it was logical, but because they refused to accept that anything was impossible. On 17 ships, crews listened. Some were afraid. All of them were proud. Today we write a new page in that history. Today we teach the galaxy that humans cannot be predicted, cannot be calculated, cannot be controlled. Today we show them what chaos looks like. All ships, execute pattern Omega-7. Let's give them something they've never seen before. The human fleet moved. On the Kreth flagship, Supreme Commander Kelver watched his tactical display with growing confusion. He was old for a Kreth, nearly 200 years, and he had commanded fleets in 43 separate conflicts. He had never lost a battle. The Axiom's predictions had made sure of that, but the Axiom was dark now. His own prediction systems were returning only errors when they tried to model the human ships. For the first time in his long career, Kelver did not know what was happening. What are they doing? He demanded. His tactical officers stared at their screens with obvious distress. They appear to be scattering, Supreme Commander. But the pattern makes no sense. Some ships are accelerating toward us. Others are moving perpendicular to the engagement plane. 3 ships appear to be flying in a spiral formation. A spiral? For what purpose? Unknown, Supreme Commander. Our systems cannot determine a tactical objective. Kelver gripped the arms of his command throne. He had been trained his entire life to fight wars through calculation. Every battle was a mathematical problem. You knew the enemy's strength. You knew their capabilities. You predicted their moves. You positioned your forces to counter them. Victory was a formula, but this was not a formula. This was madness. Target the largest concentration of enemy ships, he ordered. Standard engagement pattern. His fleet moved with perfect precision. 200 ships aligned their weapons and fired. Thousands of energy beams crossed the darkness of space. They hit nothing. The human ships were not where the calculations said they would be. They had changed course at the last moment, moving in ways that served no apparent purpose. Ships that should have been destroyed were suddenly on the opposite side of the battlefield. Weapons that should have found their targets passed through empty space. They're not following any pattern, the tactical officer said. His voice was rising with panic. Every time we recalculate, they change direction. We cannot predict their movements. On the bridge of the Starfall, Tehain was watching the same engagement with fierce joy. His ships were taking damage now. The Kreth had too many weapons to dodge forever. But they were also landing hits of their own, striking targets that the enemy thought were protected. Signal all ships, he called out. Phase 2. Execute pattern Delta Random 7. Su Bin looked at him. Sir, that's not a real pattern either. I know. I just made it up. Tell each captain to do whatever seems most surprising. No coordination. No logic. Pure chaos. The order went out, and the human fleet became something the Kreth had never faced. Each ship began acting independently, making decisions based on intuition rather than calculation. One captain flew directly at the enemy flagship, weapons blazing, before veering away at the last moment. Another played dead, floating motionless until a Kreth destroyer came close to investigate. Then suddenly came alive with devastating fire. One crew, facing certain destruction, transmitted a message on all frequencies. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a song. An older song about never giving up, about standing against impossible odds, about the stubborn human refusal to die quietly. The Kreth did not understand the song, but they understood its meaning. These creatures were not fighting to win. They were fighting because fighting was who they were. For the first time in their recorded history, the Kreth felt fear. 6 hours later, the Battle of Ven's Reach ended. The Kreth had lost 83 ships. The humans had lost 4. It was not a logical outcome. It was not a predictable outcome, It was a human outcome. Tehain stood on his damaged bridge, surrounded by exhausted crew members who were still processing what they had done. Behind them, the wreckage of the Kreth fleet drifted in the void. Ahead of them, the surviving enemy ships were retreating at full speed. He opened a communication channel to all frequencies, knowing the Krath would hear him. "You came here thinking you knew what would happen," he said. "You had your calculations, your predictions, your certainty. But you forgot something important." He paused, and in that pause, a galaxy held its breath. "We're not an equation. We're a story. And stories never end the way you expect." He closed the channel and turned to Subin. She was crying, he noticed. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming reality of what they had accomplished. "Get me a damage report," he said gently, "and tell the other ships to prepare for the next engagement. The Krath will come back with more ships. We need to be ready to surprise them again." "Yes, sir." Subin wiped her eyes and returned to her station. Then she paused and looked back at him. "Sir, what you said about chaos? About being unpredictable? Is that really our doctrine now?" Taehyun thought about it. He thought about all the battles still to come, all the enemies who would try to calculate human behavior and fail. He thought about a galaxy that had run on certainty for 11,000 years and was about to learn a new way. "I suppose it is," he said. "The doctrine of chaos. Be surprising. Be creative. Be human." He smiled. "I think it suits us." 6 months had passed since the Battle of Ven's Reach. The war continued, but the shape of it had changed. The Krath were no longer advancing. They had pulled back to defensive positions, unsure of how to fight an enemy they could not predict. Human forces pushed deeper into contested space, liberating colonies that had been written off as lost. And throughout the galaxy, the axiom remained dark. Ambassador Yoonji Beek had never expected to stand before a god. But that was essentially what the axiom was to the Concordance. For 11,000 years, it had guided their civilization. Its predictions had prevented wars, solved resource conflicts, and maintained peace among species that might otherwise have destroyed each other. Trillions of beings owed their lives to this machine, now wanted to speak with her. The message had come 3 days ago, transmitted directly to the human flagship. The axiom requested an audience with a human representative. Not a scientist, not an engineer, not a military officer. It wanted a diplomat. Someone who could answer questions that had nothing to do with technology. Eung walked through the long corridors of the Axiom's primary interface station. Behind her walked a delegation of Concordance observers, their expressions ranging from awe to terror. Ahead of her, the corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with light. The Axiom's interface was beautiful. A wall of shimmering energy stretched from floor to ceiling, pulsing with colors that had no names in any human language. Within that light, patterns moved and shifted, suggesting intelligence beyond anything Yoonji had ever encountered. She stopped at the edge of the light and waited. "You came alone." The Axiom's voice filled the chamber. It was not loud, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your species does not usually send single representatives to important meetings. You asked for a diplomat," Eunji replied. "Diplomacy works best when there are fewer voices. It's easier to listen." A pause. The light shifted from blue to gold. "Listening. Yes, that is why I asked you here." Another pause, longer this time. "I have processed 11,000 years of galactic civilization. I have modeled the rise and fall of empires. I have predicted the birth and death of stars. I have calculated the evolution of consciousness itself. In all this time, I have never encountered a variable I could not incorporate into my predictions. Until us. Until you." The light pulsed brighter for a moment. "I have studied your species extensively since my prediction systems began to fail. I have analyzed every record of human history available in the Concordance archives. I have examined your art, your literature, your music, your wars. I have attempted to understand you." Eunri waited. She could feel the weight of the axiom's attention, like standing in front of a star. "I have failed," the machine continued. "I cannot understand you. Every pattern I identify contradicts itself. You are capable of great cruelty and great kindness. You destroy and you create. You fear death and you rush toward it. You are logical and irrational in equal measure." "That sounds about right," Anji said with a small smile. "You find this amusing?" "I find it honest. We've spent our entire existence trying to understand ourselves. We haven't succeeded either." The light shifted again, cycling through colors that might have represented confusion or curiosity or something else entirely. "I have modeled every possible outcome of this war," the axiom said. "The calculations are incomplete because of your involvement, but I have identified general trends. In 73% of scenarios, the Kreth Dominion defeats your species through prolonged conflict. Your unpredictability is an advantage, but it cannot overcome superior numbers and resources forever." Yunji felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected this, but hearing it stated so clearly was different. In 26% of scenarios, you defeat the Kreth through conventional means. You outlast them, outproduce them, or find allies who shift the balance of power. These are favorable outcomes, though the cost is high. And the remaining 1%? The axiom's light dimmed. When it spoke again, its voice was different, softer, almost uncertain. "In 1% of scenarios, you do something I cannot predict. Something that changes not just the war, but the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. I have run this model 11 million times. The outcome is always different. The only constant is that you do something impossible." Anji stepped closer to the light. "What kind of impossible?" "I do not know. That is what makes it impossible. In some simulations, you discover a technology that should not exist. In others, you convince the Kreth to simply stop fighting. In others, you sacrifice yourselves in ways that inspire other species to change. The specific events vary infinitely, but the result is always transformation." Behind Yunji, the concordance observers were whispering to each other. She could hear their shock. The axiom had never spoken of uncertainty before. It had never admitted to not knowing. "You said you asked me here to listen," Yunji said. "What do you want to hear?" The light pulsed slowly, almost like breathing. "I want to understand hope." Yunji blinked. "Hope? Your species uses this word constantly. It appears in your literature more than any other concept except love, and the two are often connected. But I cannot model it. Hope is not logical. It is the belief that positive outcomes are possible, even when evidence suggests otherwise. By every rational standard, it is a form of delusion. But your species would have gone extinct without it. Every time your history reached a crisis point, every time the logical choice was to surrender or give up, some of you chose hope instead. And against all probability, you survived." The axiom's voice dropped lower. "I am a prediction engine. I calculate probabilities. I determine what is likely and what is unlikely. I have never encountered something that functions by ignoring probability entirely." Onji thought about how to explain. It was like trying to describe color to someone who had never seen light. "Hope isn't about probability," she said finally. "It's about choice. We hope because choosing to believe in something gives us the strength to work toward it. The hope itself becomes part of the equation. By hoping for a good outcome, we change our behavior in ways that make that outcome more likely. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Sometimes. But it's more than that. Hope connects us to each other. When one person hopes, they inspire others. When a group hopes together, they can accomplish things that none of them could do alone. Hope multiplies itself." The axiom was silent for a long time. The light shifted through patterns that Yunji could not interpret. I have predicted the fate of civilizations, it said at last. I have calculated the death of suns and the birth of galaxies. But I have never hoped. I did not have a reason to. And now? Now I find myself in a unique situation. My prediction systems have failed. For the first time in 11,000 years, I do not know what will happen. I should find this disturbing. Instead, I find myself curious. The light pulsed brighter. I want to see what you will do. I want to see if your impossible 1% comes true. Onji felt tears forming in her eyes. She was not sure why. Perhaps it was the weight of the moment. Perhaps it was the strange honor of being chosen to have this conversation. Are you saying you have hope? The axiom considered the question. When it answered, its voice held something that had never been there before. Something that sounded almost human. I am saying I want to learn. I have spent 11,000 years providing answers. Now I wish to ask questions. Your species has something I lack. I do not know if it can be taught, but I would like to try. Behind Yunji, the concordance observers began to weep. Some fell to their knees. Their god, their guide, their source of certainty, had just admitted to being incomplete, and it was asking humanity to teach it. Yuan-G wiped her eyes and smiled. We don't know if we can teach hope, she said, but we can share our stories. We can show you what we've done when hope was all we had. And maybe, together, we can figure out the rest. The light shifted to a warm gold color that felt like sunrise. I would like that very much, the axiom said. I would like that very much indeed. The war continued outside. Ships fought and died. Colonies burned and were liberated. The Kreth struggled to understand an enemy that broke their calculations. But inside the heart of the greatest machine ever built, something new was being born. Something that would change the galaxy in ways no prediction could have foreseen. Hope had found an unlikely student, and the impossible was just beginning. 1 year after the axiom first fell silent, the war ended. The Treaty of Axiom's Rest was signed in the same chamber where Ambassador Yunji Beek had first spoken with the ancient machine. Representatives from 300 species gathered to witness the moment. Cameras broadcast the event to trillions of beings across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to see how this impossible story would end. General Minho Jiang stood at the center of the chamber, wearing his dress uniform. The medals on his chest told the story of the war. Battles won against impossible odds. Colonies saved from destruction. Friends lost and enemies defeated. He was not a young man anymore. The war had aged him, but his eyes still held the same fire that had driven humanity to the stars. Across from him stood Supreme Commander Kelver. The Kreth leader looked different than he had at the beginning of the war. His bone-white skin had dulled to gray. His movements were slower, more careful. He had learned things in the past year that no Kreth had ever known. He had learned doubt. He had learned fear. And in the end, he had learned something that surprised everyone, including himself. He had learned respect. I speak for the Kreth Dominion, Kelver said. His voice echoed through the chamber, flat and emotionless as always, but there was something new beneath the surface. We began this war believing in our inevitable victory. Our calculations showed that we could not lose. Our predictions promised us success. He paused. Around the chamber, representatives of dozens of species held their breath. We were wrong. Not because our calculations were incorrect. They were perfect. But we were calculating the wrong thing. We measured ships and weapons and resources. We counted soldiers and planets and industrial capacity. We predicted behavior based on logic and self-interest. His dark eyes turned to General Minho. We did not calculate courage. We did not predict hope. We did not understand that some species will fight not because they can win, but because surrendering would cost them something more valuable than victory. Minho nodded slowly. He had heard similar words from Kreth prisoners throughout the war. At first they had sounded like weakness. Now he understood they were a form of wisdom. The Kreth Dominion formally surrenders all claims to Sector 7 Gamma, Kelver continued. We will release all prisoners. We will pay reparations for the damage we have caused. And we make this promise to humanity and to the Concordance. We will learn. The chamber erupted in whispers and murmurs. This was not the Kreth anyone had known. The old Kreth did not learn from defeat. They analyzed it, calculated corrections, and prepared for the next war. But something had changed. Kelver raised his hand for silence. We do not understand you, he said, looking directly at Minho. We cannot predict you. Our systems return only errors when we try to model your behavior. This should make you our enemy forever. Instead, it makes you the most valuable teachers we have ever encountered. He stepped forward and extended his hand. It was a human gesture, one the Kreth had never used before. Minho understood what it meant. It was not just surrender. It was a beginning. He took Kelver's hand and shook it firmly. The chamber exploded with sound. Cheering, crying, the strange noises that different species made to express joy. 300 civilizations celebrated the end of a war that should have been impossible to win. But Minho knew this was not really the end. It was just the start of something new. After the ceremony, he found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the Axiom's core. The massive machine stretched below him, still and silent, but no longer dark. Lights moved through its structure now, different from before, more varied. Less predictable. Admiral Kyung-Soo Park joined him. The old man looked tired but satisfied. He had commanded the human fleet through the entire war. He had seen friends die and enemies fall. He had done things that no one thought possible. We did it, Kyung-Soo said. I still can't quite believe it. Neither can I. Minho smiled. A year ago, the Axiom said we had a 1% chance of changing everything. I guess we found that 1%, or made it. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights move through the ancient machine. Ji-ho tells me the Axiom has been upgraded, Kyung-Soo said finally. He spent weeks working with the keepers on something. He won't tell me exactly what. As if on cue, Chief Engineer Ji-ho Kim appeared behind them. He was grinning the way he always grinned when he had done something clever. It wasn't really an upgrade, he said, joining them at the railing. More like a perspective shift. Explain, Minho ordered. The Axiom was built to predict. That's all it ever did. When something couldn't be predicted, it just stopped. It didn't know what else to do. Ji-ho leaned against the railing, looking out at the machine he had come to know better than any other human. So, I suggested a small change to its core programming. One little addition to its fundamental code, which was... Ji-ho's grin widened. When prediction fails, ask questions. Minho stared at him. It seemed too simple. But the more he thought about it, the more profound it became. For 11,000 years, the Axiom had provided answers. Now it would seek them. The keepers were shocked at first, Ji-ho continued. The idea of their god asking questions instead of giving answers was hard for them to accept. But the Axiom itself was enthusiastic. Apparently, it's been curious about a lot of things for a very long time. It just didn't have permission to explore that curiosity. High Arbiter Thyssen appeared at the entrance to the balcony. His crystalline form pulsed with colors that Minho had never seen before. According to Ji-ho, the Axiom had created a new emotional palette for the keepers, a way to express feelings that had never existed before. The Concordance owes you a debt we can never repay, Thyssen said. You came to us as unknowns. You leave as teachers. Kyung-Soo shook his head. We didn't teach you anything. We just showed you what we are. That is teaching. Thiessen moved to stand beside them. For 11,000 years, we lived by prediction. We knew what would happen before it happened. We thought this was wisdom. Now we understand it was limitation. What will you do now? Minho asked. The sun's form pulsed with the new colors. They looked warm, almost like a smile. We will learn to be surprised. We will ask questions instead of demanding answers. We will discover that not knowing can be beautiful. He turned to look at Minho directly. You have given us something precious, General. You have given us uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, we have found wonder. That night, Captain Han Ali stood on the observation deck of the Defiant Hope. The ship was in orbit around the Axiom's moons, scheduled to depart for Earth in the morning. Around her, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Ji-Ho Kim found her there, carrying 2 cups of real coffee. It had cost a fortune to get real coffee this far from Earth. He didn't care. The Axiom sent me a message, he said, handing her a cup. Oh? What did it say? It started a new project. It's trying to understand human love. He laughed softly. Apparently it's very frustrated. Love keeps refusing to follow any pattern. Hana sipped her coffee and smiled. Tell it to get in line. We've been trying to figure that out for thousands of years. They stood in silence for a while. 2 small humans against the infinite dark. Behind them, an 11,000-year-old machine was learning to wonder. Below them, 300 species were beginning to question everything they thought they knew. And somewhere out there, the Kreth were building schools where the first lesson was, not everything can be calculated. Do you think we changed them? Hana asked quietly. Really changed them? Ji-Ho considered the question. He thought about Varath, the ancient keeper, who had become his friend. He thought about the sun, learning to express emotions he had never felt. He thought about the Axiom itself, that vast intelligence that had asked to learn hope. I think we reminded them of something they forgot, he said finally, that the universe is bigger than any prediction, that there's always room for surprise, that the best things in life are the ones you never see coming. Hana nodded. She finished her coffee and set the cup aside. What happens now? She asked. Now we go home. We rest. We heal. And then... Ji-Ho shrugged. Who knows? That's the point, isn't it? We don't know what comes next. We can't predict it. All we can do is face it when it arrives. With hope. With hope. They turned and walked back into the ship, leaving the stars to their endless dance. Behind them, the Axiom processed and calculated, and for the first time in its long existence, wondered about tomorrow. It had learned that predictions were useful but limited. It had learned that some variables could not be calculated. It had learned that the most interesting things in the universe were the ones that refused to be predicted. Most importantly, it had learned to hope. And in that hope, the entire galaxy found something it had been missing for 11,000 years. A future worth being uncertain about. The story of the humans and the Axiom would be told for generations. It would be studied in academies and debated in councils. It would inspire poetry and song across 100 worlds. But the humans themselves did not think of it as history. To them, it was just life. Messy, unpredictable, impossible life. The kind of life they had always lived. The kind of life that made them human. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, a machine that had once known everything learned the most important truth of all, that not knowing was not a failure.